So this is the example of a dashboard. And the idea here is, if you have a data protection officer, if you have a CISO, if you have other folks who need a bird's eye view of how are we doing in privacy and security, they can take a look at it. Like in this particular case, since this demo is talking about portability and right to be forgotten, what you're seeing is that what's the number of requests that came in, right? What's the average processing time it's taking us? What are the requests which have been on hold for a while, where you may run into a risk of violating, privacy laws? Because with GDPR, you need to respond back in 30 days. There is other laws, that number varies. What you're also starting to see is how we are tackling it for various different objects. As these requests come into the hub and they are sent out to these different spoke orgs, you can see we are reaching out to the contact object or the individual object or leads, users, custom objects, so on and so forth. You can also see how many are we processing? Are we running into errors when we are doing these requests? And you can also look at these spoke orgs. So like in this example, this hub org is connecting to these couple of different orgs, so a mayor org, APAC, and EMEA org. And you can see what kind of statuses are coming up. So let's take an example of how this looks. So these are the two requests that I'm going to show. Obviously, this takes quite a long while to do it real time. So I'm going to show you how these requests look from a post-mortem perspective, if you will. So I'm going to dive into a right to be forgotten request that came in from an external system. So it does have an external identifier. If you need to, our APIs send back the record ID of this record. So your external system will keep that. The point is there is a full traceability for an external system of what request I sent, what's going on with it. And in the request that came, there were a bunch of data subject identifiers. You had phone number, first name, last name, email address. You may have an e-commerce identifier, a device, whatever it is that your particular business uses, you can send those identifiers into the hub org. And what the hub org then does is it turns around and looks at the configuration of various spoke orgs. So it's looking at the APAC org and it knows the APAC org uses contact and lead. So it's going to send this information, specific information. It knows, it needs to send a first name and a last name for contact or an email address or just an email address for leads. So it's applying that level of contextual org specific intelligence here. Similarly for EMEA org, it's going against contact and lead. For mayor org against lead and contact. In the LATAM org, they use individual. So it's going against the individual record there, which is again a Salesforce standard object. And in a number of cases, it may not find a record, just the nature of things. You don't have this person in these orgs, but in certain orgs and for certain object, it does find a record. And when that happens, the cloud compliance spoke app that is running in the EMEA org creates a case, a DSAR type case, and essentially sends back a case ID. And then it processes that record and all of that status is updated here. So what you're looking at here is the complete auditability of going against 4 orgs or 40 and seeing specific statuses coming back from this. So you now have a complete view that you can refer to. And if you need to prove that you actually did go through and enforce a privacy policy, and it's going to be the same for security. If you were trying to look at this from, how many of my sandboxes are masked, how much data retention has been run, what is the degree of coverage of these things, how many legal hold do I have? It's the same approach, the same framework, and we are able to provide you with this view across the board. And once you've done this, let's take a look at another request, which is going to be a portability request. So very quickly, again, very same idea. Request came in, it's got an external identifier. It's got some first name, last name. And, these are the requests we created, right? And what happens in this case is it's going to go against those orgs and it is going to make a request for data. And, there were portability files that got generated and we got back a JSON version of it. I'm going to show that in a minute. So at this point, let me go back into one of the spoke requests. And inside this request, you can see what we sent. So we sent, this is the status. It was processed, didn't find any record. This is kind of the query that we had sent in for this object. And this was the org that we went against. So this is kind of, right, the more detailed view of the spoke request. Let me actually show you a sample of one of these as they come back. So in portability, this is an example of the JSON that came back from a spoke org. We did this extract on that org, and we are coming back with the, some contact records here for this person. We may have other kind of records. So this is the related asset record, again, a standard object. So this contact has this asset, and you can also see a custom object, a transaction object. So essentially what we have done is we've gone there and extracted out all of this information and presented that to our end users. And this is kind of how this multi-org hub and spoke model works really well. And we are now working with some of the largest companies in the world that are trying to do this. And this is the degree of complexity that they're able to address with this across privacy and security.